Russians, hypnotism, and death rays. Oh my. Welcome back to the Hidden History Happy Hour. First, of course, my friend Alex, condolences on the loss of your great monarch.
Thank you very much.
God save the king.
God save the king.
Got my gin and tonic. Might be the last time, but it'll be respectful.
I appreciate it. If I thought about it, I'd have had a Dubonnet, which was one of the Queen's favorite tipples. Not that easy to get hold of, actually, but it is interesting, Brian. For something that in many ways was obviously foreseeable at some point, my country's been plunged into a communal state of shock. And when you hear that we're in a period of mourning, it's really true.
Yeah. Well, my apologies for not being more mourning appropriate.
That's all right. I just came from a TV studio where we were commentating on the Queen is currently lying in state in Westminster Hall, and the queue to go past her body as she lies in state is already 2.5 miles long. Provisions are available for it to be 10 miles or more, and it's filling up fast. So as we were on air, it went from 2 miles long to 2.5 miles long, and you get about 3 seconds at the coffin, so it's really moving quickly, and it's still just it's looping around my capital.
Well, that's an amazing tribute. Alex, you may not remember this as well as I do, but one of the most meaningful times I spent with my daughters when they were little was at the Jubilee.
Of course I did.
And you were kind enough to loan us your flat right on the Thames River because you were at a celebration. And it was in all ways but one very pleasant memory for me. The one memory that's not pleasant is, you probably recall, it was pouring down rain all day that day. And Dad had to go secure the spot while the girls were relaxing in your condo.
Right. Well, and if you recall that it rained heavily on the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, who even then were no spring chickens.
Yes.
And and they performed, as always, they performed their duties with aplomb, notwithstanding the conditions. I'm really glad that your girls had that opportunity to do that, and I'm really glad I could help.
Well, I'm sure I'm late to the party with this statistic, but it occurred to me earlier today that we, even our kids, may well not see another British Queen in our lifetime.
We'll see. I mean, that's on one view, of course, that's realistic. But of course, on the other hand, things happen. Our Queen at one point had not expected to be, our late Queen had not expected to be Queen. And then Edward VIII resigned, abdicated, excuse me. Gosh. Edward VIII abdicated, and giving us the new line which produced Elizabeth. So there we have it. It's events do happen, but I think you may well be right that I will not see a queen again. I must tell you, it feels very strange singing "God Save the King" after all this time. But the beauty of constitutional monarchy and the beauty of continuity is the Queen is dead. Long live the King.
Well, I don't understand your traditions anywhere as well as you do, but I felt like King Charles III did just an excellent job. I thought it was pitch perfect.
I couldn't agree more, and everything about it, it was an exceptionally good start. The emotion without being maudlin, the generosity. We mentioned, of course, Harry and Meghan, who famously no longer live in our country.
Yeah.
I thought that everything he said in it was just right. He set the bar high, as his mother did.
Well, if it's too crass, we'll edit it out. But I'm sure our American viewers are interested to know your take on the future of Harry and Meghan and the royal family, and whether they'll be kind of reincorporated in the family or not. It looks like not to me, but I don't know anything.
I would say too soon to say. It's clear that Prince William, who now becomes the heir to the throne, and progresses to the title associated, of course, all my life with his father, Prince of Wales, the longest serving heir. The now Prince of Wales clearly wanted his brother by his side. And I thought that was both constitutionally right and an absolutely logical matter of familial affection. And that may be an indication of the future, but for the longer, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a crass question at all, but they don't help themselves. They don't help with the interviews they give, the things they say. They don't help themselves. On the other hand, one always, in every family, one hopes for rapprochement if there's a rift.
Yeah, I thought it was quite emblematic of the sort of demystifying of state and family, that now already iconic photo of the brothers in the car on the way to her location. And, that is, from a security standpoint, I can tell you, I'm sure that the British security services were not happy about that. But from a family standpoint, of course, you're going to do that. It was
logical. You got to remember, we got basically, so the funerals on the 19th of September, outside of a few rogue states and states with which we do not have diplomatic relations. Every state in the world is represented by their head of state, head of government, or deputy head of government, and they're all going to be in one place. How's that for a security nightmare? This is something we may never see in our lives again. Interestingly, I mean, by dint, of course, of their long relationship during the war, former President Eisenhower attended Winston Churchill's funeral. And the reason I mention that is that that was an enormous moment in our national consciousness, which people will always remember who were there, and a moment of in our national consciousness and national life, which seemed like a turning point and a great time of change. And former President Trump, it seems, will not be attending the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. So I merely note that. But of course,
well, we don't know. Do we know if he's invited or not?
That he's not invited,
that's what
as I understand it.
Yeah.
But of course, there have been past occasions on which I attended Margaret Thatcher's funeral. It was very well attended, and America was represented in it. But one of the greatest tributes your country can pay is sending former presidents and so forth. And that, it seems, it was not going to be happening on this occasion.
Yeah. Well, somebody may have dropped the ball there. On the other hand, maybe somebody decided you didn't want a media circus that unfortunately follows him around.
Well, it's going to be a media circus either way, but I certainly take your point.
One other thing I'll say about this, and then we got a story, folks. So just stand by. Is I was thinking about in the first 36 hours, and I kind of had a little bit of a view from afar about how it was affecting you. And of course, I saw on TV how it was affecting your country, men and women. And I try to think, was there an analog in modern U.S. history? And I think the closest you would get would be the Kennedy assassination, during which time I was 11 months old. So I don't remember that, although I have been accused of it as a CIA officer. But it's not the same, because this was a 44-year-old man assassinated. So whatever national grief and fear and trepidation we felt was exacerbated by that. I don't think, I mean, Ronald Reagan was extremely popular and his funeral was well attended, but it's nothing like what your countrymen are feeling.
No, they are moments comparable in magnitude, I suppose, by dint of the Cold War and so forth, and the level of heightened emotion quite naturally felt in your country by the appalling murder of a sitting president. But of course, they tried to assassinate Reagan too. But I was going to say, on the other hand, the Queen's 70-year reign means that, unlike your presidencies, which, no offense, come and go, the Queen has not just been the Queen all my life. She's been the Queen all the life of people quite a bit older than me. So it's also quite a daunting, now that you've said that, quite a daunting thought to realize that I am approaching the age that Kennedy was when he was killed. We're at the first stage of great hold. The weird thing, Brian, since we last recorded an episode, not only do we have a different monarchy in my country, we have a different prime minister, and many of the holders of great offices of state in my country are now younger than me too, which is what I think alcoholics call a moment of clarity. So, cheers! I'm having beer today. What are you having?
Cheers! This is gin and
what kind of gin?
It's my my Washington-based county.
Oh
yeah. So the first two times in my life that I started to feel old were, one, when I realized it's pretty unlikely I'll ever be elected president. Although now,
that's rule nothing out.
I got at least 30 more years. But two, when I watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off in my 40s, and I said, that goddamn kid, get back to school, you brat. That's when I knew I was getting old.
Well, look, I don't. Not only do I not yet dismiss my political ambitions, the half-life on our prime ministers in this country is now so short. It's basically going to be everyone's turn soon, so it's only a matter of time.
True. Well, I hope that the podcast can run at least until you're prime minister, and then I suppose
I'll be doing this. I'll be doing this from office, of course.
Right. One last thing I want you to indulge me on before we move on, and I hope if you have anything else to add about the Queen or King Charles III, please. But I want to note also the loss of Mikhail Gorbachev. We're recording this on September 14th, 2022, our first show since Gorbachev died, and of course, Gorbachev was very formative in the ending of the Cold War, and that was in the sort of middle of my CIA service, and it had quite a profound effect on me. I was 2 years before that, I was the one of the East European political analysts, and the entire enchilada was trying to predict when and if the Soviet Union would crumble. And I'm proud to say I was one of a few people who started to say in the late 80s that this is coming and we better be ready for it. But I don't think anyone, myself included, expected it to happen as fast and as bloodlessly as it did.
Well, I was on air tonight on a TV channel in this country called GB News. But on the night that Gorbachev died, I was on air on a channel called Talk TV. And to do a Mandelson, which is a reference to Peter Mandelson, a former government minister, which means to approvingly quote oneself. I said on air on that occasion that we were very lucky as a global community that it was Gorbachev and not somebody else.
Yes.
Another Russian premier might have taken things in a very different direction. It took someone of Gorbachev's courage to do what he did. And I also wonder this, Brian, it's a very interesting question for history, that people can rise through a system and then change their approach once they've reached the highest office.
Yeah.
Were they always reformers and covering it? Or did they become reformers when they faced that choice in the greatest of offices in their state? So it's a question to which we'll never, of course, really know the answer.
Yeah. Or was he, in Gorbachev's case, not quite as much of a reformer as history shows him to be, because he rode the tiger and it got out from under him.
Once you start the mixing of metaphors, once you start the ball rolling, it's very hard to stop it.
But the truth is, he's a global hero either way. So cheers
for sure. Cheers to Gorbachev.
R.I.P.
Vale.
I'll say one more thing about him, which I now am going to acknowledge stealing from an American historian. We'll put this in the show notes. I didn't realize this. Well, I didn't think of it this way, but I'm sure it's true. Mikhail Gorbachev may be the singular example, at least in modern history, of an individual that probably could have been elected by popular vote in almost any country on earth except his own.
Interesting question. I mean, he was, in some ways, he wasn't the kind of personality that might have been warmly, but remember, we were in the TV age. You think Reagan being elected at the same time, former matinee idol, B-grade movie star. That's not an insult. Just this is he was a smooth, prepared for television figure. Gorbachev resolutely was not. In some ways, I wonder if he needed the authoritarian regime to take him to where he got to, at which point he might have been elected anyway.
Well, or it's just a matter of comparison, right? He was not compared to Reagan, but compared to Andropov and Brezhnev.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 100%.
He definitely was, right? He was probably the most media savvy leader that they maybe still have ever had.
Well, and I'm now cracking open my second. So I'm doing something the Belgians would strongly disapprove of. I'm using the glass of one beer for the consumption of another. This would get me lots of bad points in a Belgian bar.
Well, they also they also strongly disapprove of the Netherlands, so pick your poison, I guess.
Well, that's true too.
Ladies and gentlemen, please tell your friends about us and encourage them to subscribe to our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the show, please give us a 5-star review and message us on Twitter. People don't do this enough. If you have comments or questions about the show, or most importantly, suggestions for other stories for us, because we will use them unless they're completely crazy, and maybe we'll use them twice in that case. Alex,
yep, spot on.
What do we have up today? I've been looking forward to this one.
Yeah, me too. And actually, It's one of those stories from my book that requires a little update, because after I published the book, or after my published the book, it's eternally patient and reasonable Bite Back Publishing, who are much more professional in their endeavors than I ever was. After the book was published, I had a very interesting exchange with one of the characters in this story, who gave me some interesting details and wrinkles about it. But I'll tell you what, I'll tell the story, and then I'll tell you who from the story.
But let me just ask before you start, will this be the first time the world has heard these details?
Yeah.
All right. Do it.
Well, they may have heard it from him on other occasions, but certainly from in relation to the Deane history, that's for sure. Yeah. So we're going to turn to the chessboard for this story, because, of course, I work for Netflix, which, by the way, might benefit from a bit of the history happy hour. So why would it not work for our podcast? Although if you watch the Queen's Gambit, I will say that there will be no moves on the ceiling in this story, and there will be no chess moves described, I promise. And there will probably, although not definitely, be no wild binge drinking.
Fun fact, Alex. In one of my other day jobs, I am working with the company that created the special effect of the chessboard on the ceiling, which I
thought it was great.
Emmy. Yeah.
When she is lying, so if you haven't seen the show, go watch it. When the heroine is lying in her bed, or indeed just looking up at the ceiling, the pieces move in her mind on the ceiling that she's looking at.
Yeah, and
it's very well done. I must say to your production guy, I had no idea, but that's
I think cool. So. Let me just ask one just level setting chess question before we start. That is, if I jump all the pieces and get to the other end, I get to put the other chess piece on top of the one I jumped with, right?
Well, not quite, but given that you can promote a pawn to another piece if you get to the end of the board, I'm going to give you a pass on that.
All right. Fair.
I am, just as I'm an amateur historian, I'm an enthusiastic amateur chess player too. Right, I'm going to tell this bloody story. Most famous chess match in history is not this one. Most famous chess match in history was Bobby Fischer of the USA, who beat Boris Spassky of the USSR, winning the World Championships in Reykjavik in 1972, height of the Cold War. Having won, the mercurial Bobby Fischer refused to defend his title in the next championships. He had conditions or demands for any title defense that basically any regulatory body would not grant. That was the premise on which he walked away. And whether in truth it was the dispute he had with the regulators or that motivated him, or that having scaled the heights once, he couldn't or wouldn't repeat the feat.
He's undefeated. Why mess with it?
Yeah, he was one and done. Now, normally there'd be a competition between challengers or candidates, inverted commas, to take on the champion. And that so-called candidates round had taken place as planned in 1974. Mm-hmm. And because Fischer refused to defend the title, the winner of the candidates rounds, Anatoly Karpov, became champion of the world by defense. And prodigy Fischer newly found sort of Greta Garbo status to his approach to public appearances, didn't even really acknowledge this, and off he went. And Karpov became world champion. I mean, therefore, in 1978, Karpov had to, inverted commas, defend his title without actually having won it.
Why so many years in between? Do we know?
Because that was off again. So the funny thing about, if you may find the comparison grandiose, but it's the same as a World Cup in football. It's the same as the Olympics.
Oh, okay. It's like the Olympics. Gap. Okay, I understood. Yep.
Four-year gap, and the conditions were very often set, frankly, in the interest of the defending champion. But even that wasn't going to be enough to keep Fischer on the board. I want to be fair to Karpov too. He'd done some hard yards in the candidates tournament. He beat all comers, but it mattered to Karpov and it mattered to his critics that he didn't win the title from Fischer. The fact that it was forfeited to him effectively really stung him hard, and therefore the 1978 championships was fought in I think it's Baguio, but we're going to be corrected very quickly, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, in Baguio in the Philippines, between two Russians. But these Russians couldn't have been more different, and the biggest difference between them and their followers wasn't about chess, it was about politics and their personalities. Mm-hmm. Karpov, late 20s, model Soviet, cruised to the top of the chess world without a setback, except being able to beat Fischer, which wasn't any his fault. Staunch communist member, happy Muscovite, golden boy of the USSR. His opponent, Victor Korchnoi, paunchy guy. I'm in his 40s. I'm already on his side. Korchnoi had qualified for the candidates tournament no fewer than 5 occasions. And now his big chance had finally come. He was rebellious, he was outspoken, and he felt sidelined by the Soviet regime's very clear preference for Karpov as the face of the game. And the Russians felt and said that the generation that had been crushed by Bobby Fischer was not the one to take up the championship pursuit for the future.
And so presumably there's lots of ways they could put their thumb on the scale too, right?
Well, try this. Korchnoi makes some spiteful comments about Karpov. He didn't actually win the tournament, so forth. After he became world champion, and the Soviets banned Korchnoi from playing chess for a year. Right, so you're out of you're an elite athlete, effectively. You're an elite performer at the top of your game. You can't compete for a year because of something you said. And then in '76, so championships in '78. We're going to rewind to '76. Korchnoi was allowed to compete at a tournament in Amsterdam, possibly and probably in order to show the chess world that Karpov was going to crush people, but those people were strong enough to win other competitions and therefore would deserve the title of world champion. Korchnoi jointly wins the 1976 Amsterdam Championship with an Englishman called Tony Miles. And he wanders into a Dutch police station and
like
declares... Yeah, well, one may or may not find oneself there from time to time, normally not for these reasons. Korchnoi wanders into this Dutch police station and declares to the no doubt bemused desk sergeant that he wishes to seek asylum. So, first of many side notes in this story, straight after the Amsterdam tournament was finished, as far as Korchnoi's minders were concerned, because you always have these the beefy minders from back home accompanying you if you go out.
Often named Putin in movies.
Of the motherland, indeed. His minders thought he was deeply discussing post-match analysis with Tony Miles, sitting down and working out how their game had gone. Sure. In fact, he was getting Tony Miles to teach him how to spell political asylum. Because
wow.
I use Cyrillic. English is my first language. Can you help me out here? There's this phrase I want. I want to get right.
Amazing. And is that in the book? Is that in your book? That little anecdote?
That's in the book. So my point would be that rather than any fit of pique, that decision to defect was actually very astute of Korchnoi, not only for quality of life reasons, getting out of the USSR, but also because it would ensure that he would actually be able to play in the elite games that his ability entitled him to compete in. Because if he stayed in the USSR, he never knew when the authorities might ban him from the board again. So therefore, this demonstrates, by the way, that people who are awkward in one context might be awkward in other contexts.
Yeah.
Korchnoi goes on to compete for the Dutch, and then the West Germans, and then the Swiss. And he falls out with all of them. So by the time the 78 World Championship rolls around, he's actually considered stateless. And I couldn't, when I was telling these stories on Twitter, I couldn't think of another world championship in any sport or pursuit in which that's been the case. But my followers pointed out that independent athletes have actually competed at the competed at the Olympics relatively.
Well, let me add this. This might be news to our viewers and subscribers. My partner is a big tennis fan. We've been watching the US Open. And this is, again, September 2022. And the Russian and the Belarusian competitors have not been banned because of the invasion of Ukraine, but they've been prohibited from representing one of those two countries. So you look when they're, usually they put the flag of the country you're representing up. They have no flag, so they are stateless for purposes of
those purposes.
Yeah.
Well, Korchnoi was actually stateless.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I doubt they're going back, by the way, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, quite. But USSR predicted one interesting to be discussed.
We'll
the
see.
USSR predictably sort of slags off Korchnoi in all sorts of ways, but he regards his newfound kind of rootlessness as a badge of honor.
Sure.
In pre-match negotiations about the flags to be used, to your point, in the qualifiers for the tournament, Korchnoi's second, it's a bit like dueling. You had a second who looked after the details and the arrangements for you. Korchnoi's second was a British guy called Raymond Keane. And Raymond suggested that Korchnoi should play under the skull and crossbones, which I thought was cool. Sadly, it was vetoed by the authorities, but that was his suggestion.
So would that be then the USS R?
RRR. And Russia tried to muscle their defector off the pitch. They sought to have him banned from the qualifying tournament. How dare you compete if you're not competing for a state? We're the state you should be competing for. You've turned your back on us. You shouldn't be able to compete. It's a very rare thing, an example of the sporting authorities getting something right. Yeah. And the Soviets were told to do one. Korchnoi is in. He's one of the best players in the world. He's going to play stateless. And so he won the right to face Karpov at last. And it was a very weird affair from the get-go.
When was this exactly?
78. Okay. Karpov had a hypnotist on his team.
Sure.
Korchnoi had 2 locals who were on bail for attempted murder. So this is unconventional. Much more conventional.
In the Philippines.
Yeah, quite. Karpov's ex-KGB, I'm doing air quotes if you're listening.
Understood.
Ex-KGB colonel acting as his minder, I thought was completely normal. The chairs in which the players sat for the game were x-rayed before play because the belief had been spread more on Korchnoi's side, but that death rays had been installed to zap the competitors.
And by the way, let me just say, lest people think this is entirely science fiction, in 2022, our Central Intelligence Agency for the last 7 years has been reporting brain injuries that are consistent with electromagnetic attack from Vienna to Cuba to Moscow.
Oh, yeah, there's some term for it, isn't there? About where it started. I can't remember where.
I'll put an article about this in the show notes, but it sounds crazy, but I don't know. Maybe it wasn't.
Well, so here's another crazy thing. Karpov was fond of yogurt. It was his kind of go-to snack, and you can, because the chess matches go on for hours, right? So you can have food delivered to you. There were wild allegations made about the arrival of the yogurt constituted the passing of messages about the current state of play from his support team. Whether it was you should take a draw or offer a draw, how likely you were to win, and so forth. If the timing of the yogurt was this or the flavor of the yogurt was that the hints were involved in the yogurt.
Greek if by land, non-fat if by sea.
Yeah, well, that's that sort of thing. Yes, and if there's the spoons on the left, then it means anyway. So after prolonged negotiation, it was agreed. You'll be relieved to know that yogurt could still be served during play as long as the color was pre-agreed, the server was pre-identified. That was another one. So the person bringing the yogurt out might be a clue to you, and the timing of the delivery was pre-fixed. I mean, obviously the big issues have been nailed here, haven't they? So that was the end of Yogurt Gate. Korchnoi also had a lady friend in tow who'd spent 10 years being detained by the Russians after charges of espionage were laid against her in the Soviet-occupied zone of Vienna. Remember the Graham Greene movie? So now it's right to say, therefore, after 10 years in prison at their hospitality, she was not a big fan of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And she loudly and firmly expressed her political views throughout the championships with quite a lot of regularity. Korchnoi, by the way, was married with children, but anyway, he had this lady friend in tow at the match.
It happens.
Now, I'm not criticizing, I'm just giving context. Because the fact Korchnoi's family is quite relevant. I'll explain why. Several world championships, I will hasten to add, have been played in an atmosphere of hatred. So famous champions Alec Hein and Capablanca could have been throwing knives at each other and rather than moving pieces around the board.
So Fischer are you a chess player, Alex?
Yeah.
But what kind of, I don't know anything about the ranking of chess, but like if you are there handicaps, do you play with friends? Like what's the I'm an adequate club player. I played on the second. So my college at Cambridge was a successful, full of good mathematicians. It was a pretty good chess college, and I played on the second team. I'd occasionally sounds impressive.
It means I know some openings. I'm not terrible. I'm okay.
Impressive enough. I'll never play with you.
Well, let's play. On the contrary, let's play for money. So the point I was making, the other example I was making, Fischer and Spassky actually didn't hate each other. They got on really well.
Yeah.
But the superpowers they represented were absolutely at loggerheads. But the animosity at show in the Philippines in 1978 was on another level. Korchnoi used the public platform, this is why I mentioned the family, used the public platform offered by the tournament to air the quite understandable grievances that he felt in his private life, because he urged the release of his wife and son, who were still detained back in the Soviet Union, not allowed, not given their passports, not allowed out. And he published this material to the Soviets prior to the first match, in which he referred to Karpov as one of the jailers of my family. Where it's very pretty personal circumstances in which to be taking somebody on, and not just
because Karpov probably, I mean, he was under the same system. He just decided to suck up to it.
Right. That's entirely fair. I would just point out that when you're playing these chess tournaments, you're not playing them for like the 90 minutes of a football match. You're playing them for days and days and days. And if you've started and there's no hostility, it's a pretty bad start. Right. Anyway, spectators were pretty hard to come by for the championships, because they had 7 drawn games in a row, which is not the most exciting of things to watch. And having had these disputes and so forth between the two sides, before the 8th game, Korchnoi refused to shake Karpov's hand. We cited all the beef thing as a proof that the goodwill had been lacking anyway. And Karpov refused to shake Korchnoi's hand.
Even though he had 7 games in a row.
It was drawn.
Or no.
Yeah, they'd drawn 7 games.
But he had shaken hands.
It's shaken hands as is normal. 8th game comes around. We've had this yogurt nonsense. Your woman friends constantly sounding off. You slag me off to the USSR. Actually, I'm not. Look, there's no goodwill here anyway. I'm not shaking your hand. Korchnoi was an incredibly thin-skinned character, if that hasn't come across already. And the deeply offended Korchnoi lost his temper, played angrily. Karpov had the first win of the match at last. Raymond Keane's got a great book about the championship, and which he meant he fell out massively with Korchnoi afterwards, because he supposedly promised not to write a story of the story of the championship. He promptly did.
What question about the book? Does King think that this was a tactic deliberately intended to enrage Korchnoi?
He absolutely does.
Yeah.
Ray Keane writes that that his players' behavior, that Korchnoi's play was consistent but suicidal, and that Karpov's needling of his opponent was immoral but astute. And I think both of those evaluations are correct.
Because, Alex, I love a callback. And you'll recall that when we talked to the CEO of McLaren Racing, we talked
Zach Brown, great guy.
Zach Brown. We talked about the fact that their headphones communications are not encrypted.
Right.
And we said, God, it's the 21st century. Why don't you encrypt? He said, no. We don't want them encrypted because we want to psych out the other side.
It's part of the game. It's all part of the game for them. So speaking of part of the game, you've got Yogage out of the way. You've had the first victory at last, courtesy of No Handshake Gate. Here comes Hypnotist Gate. This guy called Vladimir Zukar. Now, they didn't just, it wasn't just like maybe this guy's a hypnotist. Like it was a celebrity. I'm trying to think of what the right David Blaine type position.
The guy that bends Uri Geller in the US. He was
always Uri Geller
bending spoons.
Like he's just a really famous hypnotist, right? And lo and behold, he's on Karpov's support team. Korchnoi group complain. He's sitting there staring at Korchnoi, like intently. Korchnoi starts wearing these reflective glasses, which must have been irritating as hell at a chess table.
Does that mean he hypnotized himself then?
And of course that would be, I suppose that would be the part of the point of the reflective.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think they were just meant to bounce it off, but maybe. So I suppose the fair thing to say is, even if you think hypnotism's a load of guff, it's pretty hard to concentrate if a famous hypnotist in the audience doing that.
I would think.
The adjudicators met on this thorny issue for 6 hours. Player suspended, and Zukar moves back a bit in the crowd, and Korchnoi's lady friend takes to kicking the back of his chair and stabbing him with a pen to try and get him moved further out. So in the end, the two camps come to an agreement. He will sit at the back as long as Korchnoi stopped wearing the reflective glasses. That was the deal done between the camps. Now, complaints are falling like rain from both sides here. Korchnoi draws even 1-1 with 9 draws. It's not a thrilling contest on the board. And he draws even with that first win for him, despite the fact that an academic wrote to him helpfully from Cambridge saying it indeed is possible to have distance hypnosis work. So, you probably have been at a disadvantage in the course of this. Fog, well, this is not a metaphor, although it's also a metaphor. Yes, fog, physical fog, rolls into the room from outside the hotel, managing the hitherto impossible feat of stopping these two blokes from arguing, and play is promptly suspended again.
Are there images of this that we can put in the show notes?
We'll have a Google around. We'll try and find. Now, suddenly, Karpov, they come back. Fog's dispersed. Karpov comes back, wins 2 games on the bounce. In potentially heavenly sympathy for Korchnoi, there was a prompt earthquake, and lightning struck the hotel. I know you think I'm making this up now, but I'm not. There was, as a result of the earthquake, so the lightning strikes, power's out. There's a landslide behind the hotel. Behind the hall in which they're playing, 2 people are crushed to death in the landslide. This is a chess tournament with casualties. 2 of the spectators are promptly crushed to death. The monsoon that follows the earthquake and the lightning, the rain floods out the hotel rooms. Play carries on.
Sure.
And as they sit back down to play again, the generator at the hotel under these conditions explodes. First big advantage that they've had, there is no big fire at the hotel. They managed to put out the generator, but it does set play back. And when they finally come back, post earthquake, post lightning, post landslide, post deaths, post generator exploding, they finally get back to play. And they have these little clocks you play chess tournament with, and you press the button for your opponent to play.
Right. Yeah,
and Korchnoi to play, he wastes, it's on his time, the clock's running. He wastes in elite world championship performance. He stands up at the front, and instead of moving a piece, he shouts for a quarter of an hour saying, I'm going to come over there and punch you if you don't move further back in the hall, to the hypnotist. Like a quarter of an hour off his clock.
How long was his clock?
I can't remember what they're playing for, 2-3 hours. But either way, okay. Quarter of an hour is a significant amount of time.
Yeah, he burned up, yeah.
Would you believe he lost? So that's Karpov 4, Korchnoi 1, for anyone who's still keeping score. So this is the point at which the pair of people who are on bail for attempted murder arrive.
Of course.
Yeah, so they were in Korchnoi's entourage, courtesy of his lady friend I've mentioned. And they had been enlisted from a supposedly devout religious sect in order to send positive prayerful messages to their contender. And indeed, whether such ministrations might have been available from penitents who were not on bail for attempted murder remains unknown. And they had to convince these people to get out of their colorful robes and into civilian clothes, get out of the lotus position, or you're prattling about on the floor, onto chairs, and finally banished from the room when serious criminal convictions was raised as an objection. Probably actually the first and most reasonable objection in the course of this tournament. You've got guys on bail for murder here. Or attempted murder? Would you mind moving them out of the hall? They claimed they would just pray for Korchnoi outside the hall. It actually seemed, as we're going to find out, that seemed to work. On the other hand, there were a group of Filipinos around the tournament who tried to blackmail Korchnoi at this point, and they said that if he didn't pay them the $15,000 they demanded in return for their black magic support they were giving him, completely unsolicited, by the way. We've been doing some black magic for you. You may not have known. You now owe us $15,000. We're going to do great injury to you.
Let me just interrupt you here and point out to our viewers and listeners that this is not even our supernatural episode.
No,
that one is still to come. This is our chess episode.
This is the chess episode. It's the chess episode. Right, we're gonna do great harm to you. You know, don't ask what it is, but it's gonna think we do black magic and be very bad if you don't pay us this money. So they have to suspend play again for the Philippines police to investigate these guys blackmailing one of the players.
Yeah. So always reliable Philippine police.
Indeed. Long story already, but longer story shorter. One more win apiece. Korchnoi 5, Korchnoi 2, 20 draws. Then there's a major Korchnoi comeback, and he wins 3 out of 4 games in a row. And in part, that's because Karpov was in a car crash before one of the games. A minor car crash, and recuperating afterwards, sat out in the sun in the Philippines, and he got severe sunburn before Korchnoi's 5th win. They say, what do we have? Earthquake, landslide, lightning strike, generator explode, black magic, attempted murder, car crash.
It is starting to sound biblical, I got to be honest.
Yeah, quite. But so the point is, they're now at 5-5. And 20 draws.
And how many days in is this?
Oh, we're like a couple of months in now. We've been at this for a while, right? And everyone is exhausted, and the organizers suggest, do you know what? Don't you think we should just cancel and come back and start again with the results reset 0-0? Can you imagine doing all this again? All the disputes. Well, to be honest, yogurt gate.
To be honest, I can't imagine doing it the first time, much less the second time.
So there's an interesting thing about this story, right? They take that offer and they make it to Ray Keane as as Karpov's, that's Korchnoi second. They say, why don't we scratch this and come back 0-0? Given the run of form, remember, 3 out of 4 games in a row. Okay, the opponent had a car crash, the opponent was sunburnt, but we've won 3 games out of 4.
Yeah. If
I tell my man we've had this offer, it will throw him off his game if we continue. I gain nothing if we're going to suspend it anyway. They may choose to suspend it without our agreement. So Ray Keane and the camp supporting Korchnoi decided to decline the offer of resetting without telling their player.
Okay. Look, let me stop you there. This is a long episode. People just bear with us because it's awesome. Do we know anything about the relationship between Ray King and his player? I mean, this is.
I'll get to
Okay.
that.
All right. Fair enough. Go.
So he declines the offer without telling Korchnoi. Korchnoi loses the next game, which was the decider.
Yeah.
So after 3 months of play, Karpov wins against Korchnoi 6-5, 21 draws. Now, Korchnoi played at the highest level for the rest of his life, but he was never to become world champion. And he'd never come this close again. The chess governing body, FIDE, pulled the same stop and start routine, cancel and start again after a number of draws. Then very next time that Karpov defended his championship against one promising newcomer, Garry Kasparov. Kasparov was denied the ability to take on and defeat Karpov on that occasion because they prevailed in that draw argument. So Korchnoi was in the candidates round some total of 10 times. Lifetime even score with Fischer, and he beat the current world champion, Magnus Carlsen. Korchnoi beat in the course of his play. So I do. 2 coders. I don't believe that Fischer walking off the scene takes anything away from Karpov's achievement, to me anyway.
Wait, you said Fischer. Did you mean that?
Yeah, I did. Did Fischer walking away, being absent from the title?
Right.
Did it mean that Karpov's achievement was any less? For me, the answer is no. You can only win the game you're in. Matches can only be won by the people who are prepared to compete.
Yeah.
And then the second code is this: what lesson do you take from the marathon? And for me, it's about the offer. It's about the offer that was made to Keane that he declined. And it may seem invidious, say after an anticlimactic draw, after all the emotion, after all the slog, maybe taking the draw is the best offer after all. Also, of course, avoiding spiritual guidance from those with murderous intentions seems a bit trite. I suppose the real other lesson is the more you pile, this is a good one for life, the more you pile up secondary disputes and distractions and fail, you're not concentrating on what actually matters. You're concentrating on being bugged and bothered by things. The less likely you are to succeed. And if nothing else from the magnificently weird Philippines round of the World Championships in chess in 1978 can be applied universally, don't be distracted by the frivolous. That seems to me to be a universal lesson.
And pick your battles, right?
And pick your battles.
So has anything remotely close to as weird as this happened in the chess world, which you understand and I don't at all?
So one of the big things that's happened since is the rise of the chess engine in a serious way. We'll have somebody say, well, chess engines have been with us in different ways for a long time, which is true, but really high powered chess engines that could beat people.
The AI, the Watson.
Yeah, that can beat, elite players. Relatively recent, since this tournament.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, a lot of the disputes now arise on whether people are using engines in tournaments and whether people are cheating. And there have been a couple of players, no need to name them, not least because some of these things are disputed, who've been caught in the toilets at tournaments on their phones, which is not allowed. They denied they were using engines, or sometimes they admitted it. The point is, that's where chess disputes go now, predictable and mundane, rather than you're using death rays on me, you're using hypnotism on me, you're smuggling messages through your yogurt, your lady friend stabbing my guy in the back literally with a pen, and so forth. Extraordinary. Go on.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you 2 other things just to wrap up the story. Korchnoi's son was supposedly given an undertaking that he could follow his father into exile from the USSR if he surrendered his passport. He did so. He was promptly drafted into the Soviet army.
I would think,
and he was arrested and charged when he refused to as a conscientious objector to perform army service. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in a labor camp, not easy in the Soviet Union. Served his full sentence no suggestion he misbehaved, served his full sentence. 6 years after Korchnoi's defection in 1982, he was finally allowed to leave the USSR. And I just want to tell you one more thing to demonstrate the evil of the regime we're talking about.
Yeah.
In the course of his journey to the most famous tournament, the 72 win against Spassky, Fischer crushed a Russian player called Mark Taimanov in Vancouver, and just like 6-love, just straight out, you're just dispatched. Taimanov's chess career, it's a lifetime of hard work, that was effectively over, and and whilst he hadn't been told that by his minders, he knew that he would never play again. Taimanov said, because he was a concert pianist as well as a grandmaster in chess, and he said it was a wonderful one-liner to Karpov over the board, recorded for history. He said, went down 6-0 and said, looked at his opponent and said, well, at least I have my music. And he didn't.
Yeah,
the Soviet regime was so spiteful, they didn't just ban him from playing chess, they banned him from concerts as well.
Yeah. So much to say about this. So people
he said that to Fischer, excuse me, I think I said Karpov. He said, looked over the board and said to the American, at least I have my music. It's a good line, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, he didn't.
Yeah. So people astute will be looking behind me and seeing my picture with Condi Rice back there. And of course, she was one of the architects.
Great concert pianist,
right. So she was one of the architects of the fall of the Soviet Union, but also great concert pianist. And I don't know this for sure, but I think if you asked her, what would you rather give up, your only African-American woman membership at Augusta Golf Club or your piano playing? Easy call for her. That's thing one. Thing two is just getting back to the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Back in the day, because it's probably a little bit easier for people to recreate it now with all the brutality that Russia is imposing on Ukraine. But cheers, Ukraine!
Cheers, Ukraine! As always,
Slava Ukraine! Yeah,
Slava Ukraine.
I find a lot of people that are my daughter's age, early 20s, they hear the word communism, and they think it kind of means like Bernie Sanders, universal education. They have no idea the level of repression,
subjugation by the state on a systematic level, designed to repress and subject any kind of individuality to the state's needs,
and to circle back
as perceived by the elite.
Yeah, and to circle back to how this conversation started, the minders of Russia now, the Putin regime, there's no chance the Cold War ends if Putin is the chairman of the Politburo when Gorbachev was, right?
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
Hey, so we promised a couple of details.
Yeah, go.
So who do you think my source was? It's pretty easy from the story.
Ray King.
Correct. Keane.
Yeah.
Keane.
Yeah. Sorry. Ray Keane.
Raymond Keane, grandmaster in his own right, of course. We had lunch, and the big thing he told me I got wrong was my assertion that the charges against Korchnoi's lady friend were trumped up. He said she was definitely a spook, mate. Look, the Soviets got a lot wrong, but they weren't wrong about that.
Wow.
And this is obviously very self-serving because you were asking.
Yeah.
And we had some drinks, and he doesn't play competitive anymore, but he's grandmaster. He's good at chess. We played 3 games, and I took a draw of him.
Get out.
So, no, I'm serious. I mean, look, I went down in flames with him too, but I took a draw.
And you don't think he let you win?
I don't think so. I mean, it may have been the drink, but you do find, although I don't think so. I mean, he can hold his booze too. But people who are competitive, right? He still plays competitive. He does exhibition games where he plays, 20, 30, 40, 50 people at a time. He has for a guy called Tony Bazan, who's a late friend of his. He runs a kind of brain games trust, and I'm getting the name of it wrong, but he runs this thing about the importance of memory. And like most people who've doggedly, determinedly become one of the best people in the world at something, I don't think he throws a game. So maybe I'm just telling myself that, but I don't think so. You
reached a legit draw with this guy.
Yeah, but I also want to say about chess that sometimes if you just don't play too terribly, in the end, sometimes you can grind out a draw.
Yeah, it's like tennis. My dad, I always called him the old fox because he would just keep hitting the ball back and wait for me to make a mistake.
Right, and maybe if there was a tie-break thing that you did in the event of a draw, I'd have gone down in flames in the tie-break. But I certainly held my serve.
All right. Well, that tells me two things. One is we're only playing poker together from now on, and two, like that's legit. Good job, man.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I have two things to add. I'm sure we're way over time, but I want to say something about it's a little bit later. This is the 1980s, but the atmosphere, the East-West atmosphere that informs this conversation. So I was a relatively young, newly minted CIA officer in 1987, let's say, might get the year wrong. And I visited Vienna. I visited our embassy in Vienna. And the ambassador said to me, we focus on two things and two things only in this embassy. One is countering Soviet espionage in Vienna. Two is making absolutely sure that our ambassador never is in a photograph with Kurt Waldheim.
He was a Nazi.
And for our viewers, you can look that up, but it's a Kilroy kind of comment. The second thing I want to say is
if I've mistook my historical figures and he wasn't a Nazi, we're going to edit that out. But I'm pretty sure he was a Nazi.
Oh no, he was a Nazi for sure.
Right,
that's
right.
why he was trying to rehabilitate his image.
Just you didn't say yes. I thought for a moment, oh my god, have I missed?
Oh no. He was a Nazi. We've talked about Werner von Braun before. He was more of a Nazi than Werner von Braun.
Yeah.
So
and von Braun was a legitimate Nazi.
Yeah. The second thing I want to say, speaking of the space program, as I just bootstrapped my own comment into the conversation, is two TV recommendations. One, of course, the ceiling chess game of the Queen's Gambit. I don't, as is obviously apparent, I don't know chess. I don't love chess. I don't play chess. Great entertainment nonetheless. The second is something on Apple TV. They're not a sponsor. They don't pay us anything. I'm just throwing this out there. It's a show called For All Mankind. Have you watched this at all, Alex?
No. Although I imagine it's about space exploration given the title.
So the premise of the show is the Russians land on the moon before the United States in 1969. And I watched a couple episodes. I'm in a little bit of a space geek and a sci-fi geek. I watched a few episodes. I thought, this is not going anywhere. It turns out it is a 50-year alternative history because the Russians landing on the moon first changes everything in American politics and American leadership. So just one of dozens of examples. Teddy Kennedy never takes Joanne Kopechne in the car to Chappaquiddick, so she doesn't die there.
I wonder why that was.
So he becomes president. You got to watch the show to see.
All right.
So he becomes president, and then his presidency is destroyed because he has an affair with guess who? Mary Jo Kopechne.
Yeah.
So Reagan becomes president years earlier than he really did.
Which he might have done. He challenged Ford. Yeah.
76. And this changes everything. So ultimately you have all kinds of competitive but cooperative space exploration between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. It's an amazing piece of entertainment. I recommend it.
I thank you for both those recommendations, one of which, of course, I've watched. And just to out-geek you, which I can very occasionally do, on the Queen's Gambit recommendation, which is good, there is a whole sub piece of interest, which will have skipped you for reasons you've explained, where people online recreate the matches that she is playing and work out which matches from history, which are actually between other players. Other players. Beth plays matches which were actually played by other people.
Yes,
and
of course.
And they then discuss those games, why they might have been just chosen for that moment, why the emotion might be right for that scene, whether they had faithfully demonstrated the execution of that game, which almost entirely the makers of that show did. So it's a cool fact.
Well, now, of course, that is a very cool fact. And of course, I have to ask the question, is the Karpov Death Ray series represented in any way in the Queen's Gambit?
So I'm not going to give a good answer because there are so many games in the Queen's Gambit in the series. I'm not sure. I haven't pursued, whilst I've been interested in that, I haven't pursued it down that rabbit hole.
All right. So to conclude, Awesome story. Netflix, continue to promote the hell out of the Queen's Gambit, but look at a little history show you might want to pick up.
Yeah. And if you're still, God bless you, if you're still listening after an hour of us gas bagging, you should definitely be hitting the subscribe button. We've got a clutch of people listening. We've got loads of listeners, but very few subscribers, and really be helping us out if you hit subscribe.
Subscribe and show up for our Twitter Spaces event, which is going to be about the supernatural. Now, imagine if the last hour has included death rays and hypnotism and murder. What is our supernatural event going to be? And tune in and send us suggestions. Alex, sorry about your country's loss. God save the king. Cheers.
God save the king.